So welcome everyone to the first official NaSTA event of this year. Thank you very much as well to all our panelists for joining us this evening and giving up their time to talk to you about how they got their first job within the sports industry, their progression from student TV and university, and offering some advice to yourselves as well. So we're going to kick things off by letting our panel introduce themselves. So Lynsey, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Lynsey. I'm a reporter for Sky Sports, and I work for them full time now. But I did do around about 18 years of freelancing after leaving Loughborough University. I've worked in a combination of radio and television, not done so much writing, although I did do a little bit. And I've worked across a few different sports, but I would say that I've specialised in football for possibly a good decade. So that is me.
Lovely. Shall I go next, Sophia? Hi, everyone. I'm Luc. I'm a freelance video editor, motion graphics designer, and I kind of dabble in graphics operating as well, which is where I made my kind of introduction to the industry. I've been lucky enough to work across a whole range of sports. What I focus on at the moment is Formula One and tennis. But yeah, I think some of my favorites that I've done in the past, I've done some table tennis, I've done football, and probably one of the most weird ones was break dancing, which was so much fun. So much fun. I wasn't dancing, unfortunately, but I don't think I could.
Hi, my name's Alex. I currently work not in sport, funny enough. I work for the BBC up in Manchester on a daytime show called Morning Live. I'm currently a runner / junior researcher there. Previously, I worked for Optus Sport as a runner / social media producer. So they are the rights holders for the Premier League down in Australia. And I also worked for a company called Whisper, and they produce so much of the sport you see. So they produce Channel 4 Formula One. They do stuff for UEFA directly. They do loads of stuff. So yeah, I've had a wide range of sports experience.
Yeah, evening everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's Thomas. I'm but into of and working in radio and TV. He's done a lot of bits and pieces here and there.
Oh, we can't hear you, Tom. Or can everybody else hear him okay? No. Yeah, we can't hear you very well.
My internet is a little bit ropey. So what I'm gonna go and do is try and move somewhere a bit close to the router because I'm up in the attic.
That's all right, don't worry.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone. And if you guys have any questions as the session goes on, make sure to just drop them in the chat here and we can answer those at the end. But let's kick things off by finding out what drew all of you initially to working within sport. So Luc, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the reason we're all here is because student TV had such an important part in kind of how we got into our careers. And same for me. It was my second year of uni, and I started to get really closely associated with the SU, and myself and 3 other course mates doing TV production. We set up a society, the Television Society, and over the course of the next 3 years, we were regularly live streaming sport. We were, taking lots of our Bucks teams, putting on these productions that at first, they started off a bit rocky. And then eventually we built up and we gained members and lots of people joined. And in the end, we were working with Timeline TV, to really put some of our varsity events on the big scale. So that's where my love for kind of live streaming sport came from. And then I think my first role in the industry came from a call I had with a production manager. I messaged her on LinkedIn. We had a Zoom call. She was so helpful. She sent me a couple of links to some jobs. And then, yeah, I got into graphics operating on the Premier League and the ATP Tour. And then from there, it kind of just spiraled. But the real sticking point for me has always been that love for kind of turning a sports match into something that people can love and watch and enjoy. And now I'm more on the post-production side of it, but it's still that same experience of delivering sports content to the world. Yeah, and that's kind of where my love came from, and that's how I ended up here.
Great. And Lynsey, was that similar sort of journey for you?
Yeah, I would say that I got into the industry because, well, first of all, I love sport, but I'm probably more of a failed sports person. If I could have been anything, I would have been the best at something. And I went to Loughborough, which is a very sporty university, and I was decent at sport, but I was never the best at anything. And I conceded when I was about 19 that I wasn't going to be at the Olympics, I didn't think. And I thought, oh, what's the next best thing to not doing it and being the person that everybody wants to speak to because you're good at something? And it's to be the person speaking to the people that are even better than you are, right? So I wanted to know what makes those sorts of people tick. And there is obviously a definite linking factor of this, like, grit and determination and focus and sacrifice. And I'm just quite addicted to those people and finding out more about them. And growing up in the West Midlands, I was a Wolves fan. My granddad used to be a scout for Wolves, so I didn't have much choice about that. And I just love talking sport. But what was probably different to the rest of the panel is when I was growing up, I didn't realize I could do sport, really. I didn't realize as a woman that I really was able to go into it as a career. So I actually started off in radio, presenting music radio shows, and always did sport and had a sports show on student TV, and always was trying to keep it in the background. But it wasn't until I presented it was a classic hits and sports results show on a Saturday afternoon for a radio station called Classic Gold, and everyone on it was about 50 years older than me, and that's not even an exaggeration. They really were. But this guy just took a chance on me, and he just said, look, I know you like your sport and you like your music, how about you do this sports results show? And so I hosted that on a Saturday afternoon for 2 hours. And I used to have all these reporters coming on from different football matches, rugby matches, any big sporting events. And I used to talk with them about sport. And the agency that supplied some of those people spoke to me afterwards and were like, look, every time we hear you talking about it, you clearly know what you're doing. Why don't you do that? And why don't you provide the updates and do the reports? And that's how I got into doing football, really.
Lovely. Thomas, let's test out your internet and see if
Yeah,
it's
I've moved downstairs now, so hopefully it's a bit better.
Yes.
better.
Awesome. There we go. So yeah, so for those who missed my intro, by the way, I'm Thomas, fresh out of uni, and well on the path now, hopefully, to entering some form of sports journalism. And sport was never something I sort of lived and breathed like a lot of the sports journalists and the anoraks out there do. Although I've always had a pretty decent interest in it. And I was approached, well, actually, tell a lie. My mum approached a radio station called GTFM back when I was 14, which is down here in South Wales. And um, she basically said, oh, they're looking for volunteers. And me being, sort of interested in music and radio, that sort of thing, I thought I'd give it a go. And it was by chance, really. They kind of asked, well, what's your knowledge on sport like? And I thought, well, not that bad. But I know, large bits locally, if you're talking the big teams here, Cardiff City, Cardiff Rugby, the Cardiff Devils ice hockey as well. So that was when I started hosting my show called The Season Ticket on a Saturday afternoon, which takes a largely similar format to what Lynsey's has, or did have actually, interspersed with radio and a host of reporters that we've built up over the years. But it was then when I was sent out on my first reporting gig, and I can remember it clear as day, 16th of September 2017, Cardiff City versus Sheffield Wednesday at home. Sol Bamba, God rest his soul, who's only just passed away, sadly, scored the winner in the 5th minute of a winner equalizer, sorry, in the 5th minute of added time at that one. That's when the ground just erupted, and it wasn't even a special game, as it were, as far as the league standings go. It was a draw with a mid-table team, but that's where, from where on in, I kind of got hooked on sports journalism and kind of relaying what I was seeing in front of my eyes, back to listeners and then eventually viewers as I delved into television from there.
Amazing. And Alex, do you want to round us off with your journey?
Yeah, sure. So I guess one thing that really helps is obviously, as we're saying, student TV and student media. I was quite fortunate that I could cover our Leeds varsity a few times. So we were really fortunate that we actually had access to Headingley Stadium in Leeds. So not the cricket ground, but the rugby ground next to it. And we were given the opportunity to broadcast from it, which was interesting because my last year we had a streaker on the pitch. So that was a real fascinating one to cover. And we do have a frame of just this fully naked man on our screen. So that was, great fun. And I guess, yeah, I think one thing that's really unique about the UK as well is that we are such a hub for like sports production. That's I think you don't realize how many companies are actually set up dedicated to not even just the production of it, but the technical transmission of sport. I could actually go on about it. There are so many companies dedicated to sport, and we are just such a hub for talent in the UK. So yeah, I kind of just was sitting there and taking it all in, at university, kind of just trying different things. And I guess this will go on to the next question, but I was quite fortunate that within our student TV station that we had quite a few alumni come back. And one of them was the one who worked for Optus, and he messaged me and was like, I'm looking for someone. Do you want to come along for a month working on the Women's Euros? And I was just like, yeah, sure, why not? It's not something, at the start of the year I thought was going to happen, but I think one thing I've learned in media is just to say yes to things. You open yourself up to so many different opportunities, and I said yes, and it got me involved, and then it gave me some great experience to open up doors to work in other places. So, yeah, it was kind of just falling into it by accident, really. But yeah, a lot of fun.
That's great. And I guess, Alex, you've just briefly touched on what our next question is, and that is you landed that first job in sport. What was that kind of experience like, and how did that almost change your career path going forward?
I mean, it was great. I mean, so obviously in 2022 we had the Women's Euros in England, and it was literally a team of a producer, so that's the alumni. We had a professional women's football player, ex-international, called Amy Harrison. So she was from Australia, and it was her first kind of like presenting gig, really. She played for PSV Eindhoven at the time over in the Netherlands, and it was me on my first ever job. And it was a really unique thing because the company would just take the live feed from UEFA, so we didn't have to worry about anything technical on the ground. We just kind of, our main aim was, because Australia was hosting the Women's World Cup the following year, was to create social content to kind of really connect with younger people, regardless of who they were, to kind of get invested in the Women's Euros and get invested into women's football, to therefore, get really excited about the Women's World Cup. And obviously the Women's World Cup and the Women's Euros had such a response. So yeah, it was kind of just, as I said, just being at Leeds, and someone messaged me being like, "Oh, I'm looking for someone. Are you up for doing it?" And I think just asked if I could drive and know how to hold a phone. I was like, "Yeah, I can do both of those." And he went, "Sure. Do you want to come along for a month?" And I just went, "Yeah, sure." And it took me to some the glamorous parts of the UK: Rotherham, Brighton, Sheffield, all of those grounds, but it was, honestly, I look back on it and it was just such a brilliant experience. Like, at the start of it, I didn't expect to, get to Wembley in England, win it, and all this kind of stuff. It was just mental, and it was really nice to see it. I guess when you work on something, you see it differently to how you would be watching it, and it was really nice just to see the whole country kind of embrace women's football at that point in time. And yeah, it was just great. I mean, I really am not really selling it at all, but yeah, it was just like it was challenge. I won't say it was easy. It was a challenge because working on tournament football, you don't have a lot of time to rest, really. So I remember one day we'd kind of wake up one morning in Brentford, then we have to drive up to Sheffield. You'd check into the hotel. You've maybe got an hour to yourself, and then you go to the stadium from 5 o'clock to about 10, 11 o'clock, and then you kind of do the whole cycle again. So, I did live on hot dogs. It did ruin me badly, but I wouldn't change that first experience. And then yeah, having that experience let me do further things with Optus and then work with Whisper.
That's wonderful. And Luke, did you kind of have that similar wow experience on your first kind of sports project?
Wow experience. I remember my first live production. It was 2 a.m. I was working on Major League Soccer in London, and it was my first time graphics operating. I'd done like the training and whatnot, but nothing compares to the real show. And I was supposed to have someone like shadowing me and helping me through it, but he got stuck on a different show. So I was by myself. It was 2 a.m. The producer and director was a really nice guy, but obviously the pressure was on because live TV is stressful and it has got pressure. And I did it. I got through it. I absolutely got through it, and I think that was the kind of moment where I thought, "Oh wow, I've just like pressed a bunch of buttons. Things have gone out to the world. I'm on Sky Sports at 2 a.m. Like I know there are 10 people watching, but I'm on Sky Sports at 2 a.m. So that was kind of the first experience for me where, I mean, it was a wow thing. It was definitely a wow. It was more of a oh crap thing, but it was that feeling of going on air for the first time and then coming off air and knowing that you've survived, like you've done it, and then from there each time you do it, it gets better. You get more confident. You know what you're doing. You understand the running order. You know the people, and I think that is eventually you get to that place, and it takes weeks, it takes months, it takes years to get comfortable enough. I'm sure everyone who works in live now will say that you never really get over that thrill of being on air. It shouldn't ever get to the point where it's comfortable enough that you're like, yeah, I'm on air, I'm going out to millions of people. Like it should never get to that point. There's always such a thrill behind it. But yeah, I think Thomas said as well that he remembers the first, radio show. I remember my first experience being live on air, and those are the moments that kind of stick with you, that you remember for a while. So probably not a wow experience. I had nightmares the day after. I remember sleeping and I fully had nightmares about what buttons I was pressing and if I was going to press the right button to put the right graphics out on air. But I got through it, and then thankfully I've gone on to do some really cool graphics operating, and now moved away from live a little bit more and gone into post production. But you still get that thrill of the things you're working on.
Yeah, can completely understand the nerves. Lynsey, did you have nerves, excitement? What were you feeling at that first job?
So for anyone who saw my LinkedIn post, I mentioned NaSTA and winning a NaSTA award. Don't ask me what year it was. I mean, I'm going to sound like your grandma. I think it was something like 2003 or something ridiculous. But I remember it was in Glasgow, and I actually didn't enter the show that I presented. I knew that the show itself was entered, but I didn't know that my friend had entered me for best presenter as well. And I hadn't even thought about television because I had been doing radio from the age of 13. I did hospital radio, I did student radio, community radio. My poor dad used to get up at 6 a.m. on his weekends and take me to a fire station in Dudley to present some radio there. And so I never even thought about telly, although when I started getting more and more into sport, I think even though we hear great sport moments on radio, I do see it as more of a visual thing. So if I really want to engage in a major event, I would choose to watch it than I would to listen to it to begin with. So it was becoming more and more visual to me, and this show had won an award. And as part of that, one of the judges worked for BBC Scotland at the time, and his name was Ewan Angus, and he wrote me a letter saying why I had all this potential and that I should definitely pursue a career in presenting in television. And I was like, oh, because I just did it as a hobby and it was on the side, and radio was my thing. And I just parked it for a while, and I just carried on doing radio for some time, probably until I was in my mid-20s. And then my very first job in TV came about because when I moved to London, there was a company, and it no longer exists anymore. So before everybody starts writing it down, I'm afraid it doesn't exist anymore. But it was called Top TV Academy. And they did what effectively you're doing now, which was networking events. They had speakers, and you could go along and you could meet people. And one of the women that ran that at the time put me forward for an audition. And the audition was for something called football365.com, which I believe is still in existence. But they used to have football bulletins, and they used to be presented online on the internet. And back in this age gone by, that was a huge thing, right? They were one of the first to be doing it, and they advertised for presenters for it. And I went to this place in Victoria in London and went for an audition and got the job. So that was lucky thing number one, is that I was put forward by someone who saw the opportunity, because I think some of these things are all about timing as well. And when you say about nervous, I probably was nervous, Sophia. I can't remember never not being nervous at auditions, because they're quite taxing and horrible, aren't they? You're like getting judged constantly. But the second stroke of luck that happened is that I started presenting these football bulletins on football365.com, and I'd been doing it maybe 5 months, and the company got bought out by Sky Sports, and Sky then auditioned all the presenters to be Sky Sports digital presenters. And I got one of those jobs. And that's how I actually went really quite deep into like going straight to Sky, from doing a lot of radio and doing a few little bits of TV, but nothing major. I was suddenly in this huge company doing digital bulletins for them, and loved it. And probably would still be doing that now if they hadn't have stopped and changed things, to be honest, because I really enjoyed it.
Amazing. And Thomas, you've briefly touched upon your first job as well. I wonder, what sort of challenges did you particularly face when you went into that first sporting role?
Yeah, where do I start on that one? I suppose I was in quite a unique position to start with, in a sense that I actually got my first job in sports before I'd hit uni or started in student TV and student media or anything like that. So while you're sat there kind of thinking, wow, look at this. I remember the first show I just kind of was thrown into and ended up having to host on my own. The one presenter who was there with me, Jared, he'd gone off to Washington to study journalism at the time, and the other host, Casey, had gone into labour that morning. So I was,
Wow.
I know. So I can remember fading up the microphone and going, "Hello, is anyone there?" I don't know, but that that was something that you kind of just got to grapple with yourself. But then once you go out on a reporting mission, and this applies if you're using a camera pitch side, whether you're up in the TV gantry, actually dealing with a stadium environment. I make no secret of having autism and standing up for inclusivity within sports and within journalism itself. So that was ultimately my biggest challenge. So if you're talking huge crowds, how to approach people and how to talk to them, that's daunting enough for anyone. So there's no sort of downplaying the task of having to speak to your colleagues in the press room, in the press conference, and how to sort of structure the tone of those questions and how to answer them. That's really difficult in itself. I suppose the biggest challenge, though, is actually just get involved. And as difficult as it is, just throw yourself in there, because actually the chances are very, very slim of you walking in and talking to somebody in the press room and asking, and going up to them and saying, "Look, are you noticing the same things as me? What kind of things are you writing down in this press conference? Or what kind of angles are you looking to get on the camera? If you talk to people who've been there and done it before, and especially if it's your first time going in there. And you're very unlikely to encounter somebody who says, 'Go away. I'm not going to tell you my secrets of the trade.'" And they're all lovely as well. And actually even getting involved with the clubs and the people who were hosting you at the time. So I played a role in helping design the sensory room at Cardiff City, round the corner from me. So helping to then build a match day experience for fans, as well as in regular fans, I suppose, as well as people who were just using that room on a one-off or in other areas of the stadium as well. So I suppose throwing yourself into that sort of community and focusing on a questioning and being a part ultimately of the solution to this kind of problem, which is still a sticking point to an extent, with inclusivity within sports journalism, which is an industry which is still predominantly dominated by white men who are of a certain culture and have had a certain upbringing around sport. But ultimately, whoever you are, you deserve to be in that room with whoever's in the press conference, whoever's in the working area, whoever's in the stadium, in the gantry, and whoever you're interviewing them. You deserve to be there as much as the person sat next to you. So, ultimately, I think the key thing is to remember that, and as long as you do that, you're not going to go far wrong in being unafraid to ask the questions that you've got on your mind.
Great, and thank you so much for sharing that. Alex, I know you touched upon the fast-paced nature of football, but can you kind of think of any other challenges you might have found initially going in, obviously as a freelancer as well?
Yeah, I mean, generally, like if we think about TV, generally as an industry media, like it has been rough for the past year and a bit. Whatever you're looking at, whether it's sport or not, whether it's unscripted, scripted media, it does take a while to find a job and settle in. I think one thing that has changed definitely within recent years is that there's a massive rise in clubs now becoming media entities, which I think is really interesting. I know Media City, Jesus Christ, Man City have a massive media department. Like they are basically their own TV production company, which is absolutely incredible. So I think that's as you know, talking to students, that's a real big challenge, is kind of getting your foot in the door. Because despite having a job already and having some experience, you still, that's not it, and that's a real difficulty whatever you do. You've always got to fight, you've always got to like push. You can go to people for advice for sure, and I've been very fortunate that I've been able to go to places like IMG just by asking someone, can I come along, and they go yes. So it's very easy to I won't say very easy. It's very possible for you to send an email out, ask questions, turn up to events like this and ask away. Because the worst thing that can happen is someone says no and you go, oh, okay. But 9 times out of 10, they will say yes, and you can do some great opportunities. I think it's just early on in your career at this stage, it's just trying to translate that into a more of a career, I guess. But I think the beauty of sport is there's so many facets to it, and there's so many, obviously sport is sport generally. You may not be interested in football, but you may love rugby, you may love darts. I mean, look at darts, that's had a resurgence over the past year and a bit. That's that there's so many things to it. So there's a beauty to sport that if you've got a niche, you can really enjoy it. I think another challenge, which is something I guess I've touched on when I've spoken to people working in sport, is that it's difficult to work in a sport that you love, because it kind of feels like after a while, it kind of feels like when you want to relax and watch, say, Formula One, you can't, because then you're thinking, oh, it's work, and oh, this is things like that. Like I know people who work in football and they're like, I can't go home and just watch football anymore, because it's kind of just, I kind of feel like I'm working. So that's another challenge. It's not something I've experienced yet, but yeah, I'd say for me right now, and I guess for people here, it's just trying to get that foot in the door and kind of get that career kind of launched. But that's going to, the way TV is at the moment, the way the media is at the moment, it is always going to be difficult.
Thank you. And Luke, you talked about how you moved from like live into post-production. Did you find different challenges between the two? Have you found one more comfortable to work in than another?
Yeah, I think in my first year work outside of uni, I did probably 90% of my work in live. And then second year, it was about 50-50. And then my third and fourth year now, I'm definitely more in live. I've still got a lot of contacts. Sorry, I'm more in post-production. I still have a lot of contacts in live, and I still kind of step in when I'm needed to do some graphics operating on the ATP tour and all of that. So it's really good to have those kind of connections. But yeah, in terms of comfort, I think the reason that I've landed in post-production and I'm staying here for the moment is definitely kind of, I would say it is more comfortable for me. I did find live quite stressful and quite difficult at times, where post-production just gives you a little bit more breathing room, which I really like. It gives you more time to create something that is really going to touch a lot of people and really make a difference. But I think something Alex mentioned earlier that I'd really like to touch on is how the industry works. I think the biggest challenge for me going into the industry was just working out who does what. Honestly, I think that's the biggest thing, is that you're telling me you've got a production company that are working for the actual company, they're working for the brand, and then they've got a graphics company with a data company. There's so many facets, just like Alex just said, about who does what. So I think the first thing I did was just understand, sure, I can get a job as a graphics operator. I didn't actually know what it was when I first became a graphics operator. I didn't know what that role was, but who do I need to talk to And for me, I spoke to the production manager and she told me a bit about data companies that are doing live graphics. So that's how I kind of understood that area. But, I was working for Premier League Productions, who are a great PLP. Obviously, that they do all the world feed. But then I didn't realize that Sky Sports will be the host broadcaster, or Prime Video will be the host broadcaster, and then PLP will take their feed and then put their own graphics on it. So I think just understanding the layers in live sport, just understanding the layers is really important. Just knowing where you can get your foot in the door. And then it's the same with post-production as well. I freelance at the moment at Formula One management, but a lot of people don't even realize that there is a team at Formula One. They always say, which team do you work for? And I'm like, no, I work for I work for Formula One management. And then, as Alex said as well, all of the teams and all of the football teams, they all have so much in-house now that just understanding where you can work. And I know it sounds a bit silly, like I'm looking for a job. Of course, you need to know where those jobs are, but you really do need to know who you can work for, what you want to do, and then how to kind of navigate the chain of command. Like, do you go straight to the top to Formula One, or do you go to a team, or do you go to a sponsor, or do you go to the tire manufacturer? There's so many kind of facets that build up live sport and post-production sport and all sport, that just understanding how it works is really, really important, and something that I struggled to get my head around for a while, probably still do now. And it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. So just keeping on top of who does what in the industry is really important.
Absolutely. I think sometimes it's not very clear as to who you go to or who you're actually working for. So that's a really key thing to get your head around. And Lynsey, have you experienced similar challenges? I also know you touched upon earlier about being a woman as well, trying to break into the industry. What's it been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I will skip over that because I think the environment's changed a lot since I started. I mean, in 20 years, it's unrecognizable. So I think there's a lot more women in press boxes. I still think there's a lot more to be done on the written side, but certainly in front of camera, it isn't an issue. It isn't an issue in production teams that I work in. I still think it's an issue in boardrooms in terms of decision making. Especially, and maybe on the engineering side as well. That's an area which predominantly women have never really gone into as much. That's an area where certainly I imagine it would be intimidating in the way that it was for me 20 years ago, walking into a press room being like one of the only women. But overall, I think a lot of that has moved on. But in terms of challenges, like I can only speak about on-screen journalism, because obviously Alex and Luc have given you some insight into the roles that they do. And what I would just double down on is there are so many roles. And if you're creative, if you want to develop ideas, there are whole departments that do that. So don't necessarily pin everything just on one area. I think there's a lot of versatility in the industry as well. And in terms of being on screen, I found that it took me a long time to be able to say, I am a presenter, I am an on-screen journalist, because I was doing running work, I was being a researcher, I was producing, I was doing anything I could to make a living whilst also making the on-screen stuff, which is what I wanted to do, my priority. But I think you would be blessed from somewhere like that. I've never known anyone else to have this, where if you just left uni and just got to present every day and that was your job, I don't think it exists. I don't think it is. So I think if you want to be an on-screen journalist, you are going to have to juggle and you're going to have to balance, because you're going to have to make money doing other things as well whilst you're doing it. And on that note, I think one of the biggest challenges as an on-screen journalist is I remember applying for loads of on-screen journalist jobs, like broadcast journalism jobs with the BBC, with Sky, with whoever. And they were full-time jobs. And every single job I went for, they're like, you've not got enough experience. And this was talking to someone as well who, and I know there's a lot of people like me that whilst they're at uni, did student TV, were on committees, did the jobs like you're doing, Sophia, like I said earlier, I did student radio, hospital radio, community radio. So I didn't feel like I hadn't got much. I even worked and got my first paid commercial radio jobs whilst I was at uni. So a little bit like Tom, I was getting paid to do jobs in the industry presenting before I'd even graduated. So I thought, gosh, like I should be in with a real shot. but it was rejection after rejection after rejection for a full-time job, because those full-time jobs where you want a bit of security, you're going up against people who might have been writing for a paper for 3 years, or have been doing it just longer and got more experience. So I felt forced into going into freelancing. And I say that through a smiley face, gritted teeth, because I ended up doing it for 18 years. And I ended up with companies knocking on my door saying, would you do this full time? And me going, no, I'm freelance. I'm enjoying, I'm having the best time. I get to go and do this, go to this place. And if I don't want to do it, I don't do it. I go on holiday when I want. I can travel. I can work for multiple different companies, right? And there is a part of it that you will become a little bit addicted to if you're anything like me. So it was hard to leave that freelance life behind. But I think that is one of the things that I wanted to highlight for on-screen journalists, is a real challenge, is to get a full-time position as a broadcast journalist is really hard. They do exist. There are some at the BBC that I definitely know of. I think places like Whisper do them. But remember, you are swimming in a pool of a lot of people wanting to do the same thing. So it's very, very competitive. So all I would say to anyone wanting to be an on-screen journalist is, don't worry if you're doing researching, if you're doing production work on the side, and just make sure you're doing something that is on screen. It might be like Alex said, looking at the football clubs, the local football clubs, or like Tom, you know, he said he's round the corner from Cardiff, so he went and did some work with them. And I think that's the thing, we've got no excuse now. You can hold your phone up and you can do something to camera every single day. I never got to be able to do that. Believe it or not, I had to send off VHS tapes. Which seems crazy now. Like, you look at the world that we're in and you can post a link and put something on YouTube and show your show reel. I used to have to write off and post demos. And on that note, a very quick funny story, and I'll let Tom go in. I once made a demo tape in radio, and I went for a job to get a bigger job at a bigger station. And I stupidly sent my demo and I hadn't made any copies. And it wasn't until it was in the post that I thought, if I don't get this job, what do I'm going to have to ask them for the tape back. Thankfully, I got a phone call and I went to go and meet the people, and I got given a Saturday show. But oh my word, like, I mean, that wouldn't happen now because you probably have it on a link somewhere. But I'm just saying to people, make copies of things, ask for copies of things. I think especially if you're on screen. Anyway, that's enough of me talking, Tom.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, it is interesting actually when you look at these kinds of things and the places you end up. I'll probably talk more a bit about my student TV history, given I haven't touched much upon that so far. So I was the station manager of CUTV last year, as in 23-24 now. It's an academic year. And before that, I was the equipment manager. Before that, a humble fresher coming in. And actually, I came in basically thinking, okay, I could do student radio, but I've done radio for a few years now. Let's try something new and freshen things up a bit. So I got behind the camera, and then I was I started filming rugby matches for the uni rugby team. It wasn't long after that, I was up on the gantry at Llanrumney and stood next to the team analyst, Joe, who's actually brought in from the WRU, Welsh Rugby Union. So he then said, well, look, give me a number and I'll have a few jobs for other teams. Teams right across Wales need analysis footage, because that needs to be sent to the league to prove that the game actually happened to start with. Then obviously coaches and players, staff are going to use it for analysis footage as well. So when you're talking TV and camera work, not all the cameras you see in front of you on the TV or in the ground are actually going to be used for stuff that's necessarily published. So the analyst is a huge important part of the team as well. So that goes back to talking about the different layers that Alex and Luc have been on about, when you're talking of where you can actually work and the content you're going to produce. Just because the masses aren't going to see it at first doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be important or useful to somebody. So that's always worth bearing in mind. And the second thing I wanted to touch upon there was that as you progress through the line, down the line, it is just a case then of meeting more people. The more teams you go and work for, the more people who come and recommend you, especially if you're talking in a freelance capacity, as Lynsey said, the more potential clients you've got. So that's all about as it is really. Once you've kind of got your foot in the door and you set that ball rolling, I kind of feel that you get to know enough people to the point where your weekends and midweek fixtures are largely taken up now by people who are asking for your services, and that's rewarding in itself. I know that's one of the later questions, so I won't drop on to that too much, but that's rewarding in itself to know that you come recommended and that people have actually recognised your work to that extent.
You've made me think, can I just interject with one thing? Because you just made me think about challenges. And we've all touched on this and we've all said it. But as someone who's a bit further down the line on it, just ask yourself, am I okay working weekends for 20 years? Right? Just ask yourself that, because that's what sport is. And as much as I love what I do, every week, you know, now I'm married and I've got other responsibilities and life does change as you get older, but you'll miss friends' weddings. I've missed christenings, and that is one of the challenges. That's one of the big challenges. It's unsociable, really, for
Oh yeah,
a lot of your friends.
I find that to be massive. And even as I was going through uni doing this sort of work, you might have experienced the same thing. Even your social life is a huge part of going to uni, having that sort of experience. And you're looking at even student TV socials, and you kind of got to say, sorry, nipping off early because you know, I've got Palace away tomorrow or something, and and you got to be on the bus early doors. So it's yeah, it is a challenge, but if you're dedicated to the job and you enjoy it enough, you're not going to work a day in your life. But yeah, that's probably one of the number one things you want to consider before you go properly down this path.
Defo.
Great. And Thomas, you were always one of the last ones standing at student media socials anyway, so don't
Well, they were on a Wednesday, so that was
Yeah.
kind of all right, weren't they? Oddly enough, we put them on the same day as the sports socials because so many of us had be off doing the sports analysis and highlights reels. Yeah, I did kind of feel obliged when I was managed to stick about to the end and see it out though. And you know, who needs sleep when you're 21?
You were being conscientious, Tom.
That's all it was. You know, you've got to play the game properly, haven't you?
Great. Well, I want to ensure we allow enough time as well for some of the questions we've had submitted. So I'm going to ask each of you, can you name one skill or character trait, anything that you can think is almost essential or something that people should learn to develop if they want to work in sport? So Alex, why don't you kick us off?
You're gonna hate me. I'm gonna back up what these other two said. One reason I'm working in daytime is because I basically work Monday to Friday, and it's wonderful. I have my weekends. It's great. I adore it. I would say one thing that's definitely important at the moment in terms of sport is I'll say this for anything you're working in right now, social media. And it's such a niche thing, but everything we do now, even if you're in radio, when you are looking at radio and social media, you're not listening to it, you're watching it. Visual content, that kind of vertical visual content is so important. And that's how I got my into sport. You know, football clubs need it. You know, Sky Sports stuff when you're looking on TikTok or Twitter, you know, if you're looking for an in, and you know, at the end of the day, these social media bits of content, they're targeting people our age. We are the audiences. So I would say, you know, as Lynsey was touching on before, we are in this unique opportunity that we can make stuff as we want. So I know someone who made content on their phone all the way in Australia. They you know, they made filters for TikTok, all this kind of stuff, and now they work on Formula One doing social media, and that's just from their own experience, their own kind of skills, and that, you know, proving to people I can do this. So you know, we have a unique opportunity. So I would say the best thing you can do is create content for social media. You know, you're already doing a great thing already with student TV of just making content for the fun of it. So, you know, keep on doing it. Do it for social media. Just do it because you love it, really. That'd be my advice.
And Luke, what about you? Something similar to Alex or something different?
Yeah, something a bit different, I would say. As a freelancer, I think that the biggest thing that I've learned in that kind of way of working is that, and it sounds kind of morbid, but you are always dispensable. That's the thing. As a freelancer, there's no certainty. You could, you know, touch wood, and it doesn't happen to anyone, but you could be dropped next week. You could have you know, it's always kind of working month to month or year to year. I mean, thankfully, I've got some really good relationships with clients that have booked me, you know, already up until the end of 2025, which I'm so grateful for. But I know that that could not happen at any point. So I think having that in the back of your mind, always knowing that you are dispensable as a freelancer in the worst sounding way, you are, unfortunately, you don't have the security of a full-time role. So probably flipping that on its head, make yourself indispensable. You know, you always need to act, everyone knows this, you always need to act professionally, you need to act nice, you need to be a great person to work with in a full-time job. But as a freelancer, you need to go that extra step to make sure that everybody knows you are there and you want to stay there and you will go above and beyond, because you don't have that security of a full-timer. So I think probably, is it a skill? Is it a mindset? Is it a lifestyle choice? Just be the person that no one will want to replace you. And yeah, I think if you can keep up that positivity in the way that you work and the way you interact with people, then, you know, freelancing will come easy to you.
Absolutely, that's some great advice. Thomas, what would you add on to that?
I'd say that the number one thing, or the number one skill you've really got to master, is time management when it comes to the actual act of being there on the day, and getting your footage or your match reporting properly. Because you know, a player standing over a free kick isn't going to wait for you to hit record to press, you know, to capture that footage, or for your bit of commentary. You know, the commentator's curse is natural; it happens because, you know, a fluke is, I say, a more regular occurrence than, I suppose, for want of a better word, you know, it happens occasionally, basically. So you know, you can allow for certain things, but time management relies on everything. So you're talking, leave yourself enough time to set up your camera, your microphones, your laptop, even your software. So I do a lot of stat inputs as well. For team websites. So if you're following a live blog, for instance, on a, you know, on your favorite team's website, or in a sense following your live Twitter feeds, somebody's got to be there doing your possession stats, shots on goal, or, you know, the amount of points you've scored and scoreboards, that sort of thing. So if you're talking time management, nothing's going to wait for you, I think, is the ultimate aim. So make sure, if you have to arrive nice and early or as early as you can, do it. Make sure everything's right and ready before you go, and make sure you've got a clear plan of what you're going to go in, of what your intention is to capture when you go in.
Great, thank you. And Lynsey, do you want to summarise and add in your input to that question?
Yeah. So I would go versatility and ideas. So I mentioned versatility earlier, but I think gone are the days where you can just be a sound operator or a camera operator of old. I mean, still we do work with some of those people in the industry that do specialize, but I think nowadays, if you're graduating, it's better to be versatile and be able to do multiple things. So I would say you need to at least be able to have 3 skills that you can do, and one of those might include social media, one of it might be writing, it might be production, it might be researching, whatever it is. I would have 3 different skills that you can do, that you can lean on at any given time. And ideas really will set you apart. Ideas have meant that I've had longevity, I think, because when things have been a bit quieter, I set up my own production company in COVID. I pitched to get some commissions and was successful on 2 and made a couple of programs. And I think if you can have ideas, they'll set you apart. And coming back to Alex, who was talking about the social media side, yes, when I speak to on-screen talent, I do tell them what I said earlier, which is, you know, you've got this phone in your hand and you've got this tool that you can use every single day to show what you can do. But the problem with that, and the problem compared to the era where we were sending out VHSs, is that there was no immediacy. It took effort to make the VHS, to put the show reel together, to put it in an envelope, to find out the address, to, I'm going to say, nag someone, but obviously what I mean is ask people for feedback. And it took a lot of effort, and everything nowadays is so immediate that it doesn't take effort. So if something's going to stand out to me, if you're going to do something on camera, do it different. If you're going to do an idea, don't just go and do this to a football player and make a montage of it or get a high five, or that to me is not original content. And I don't think that those people should be able to call themselves content creators. Content creating is about having an idea. And if you can come up with a really good idea, oh my word, you will never not work. I promise. If you can come up with good ideas, that is your currency.
Amazing. Well, thank you all of you. That has been some great advice. We're going to open the floor up now to some questions that have come in. So we had a few pre-submitted, so feel free to just jump in and answer. So the first one is, Are there any unexpected career paths you can think of which lead you into sports broadcasting, which you could explore or recommend?
I mean, as it's sports broadcasting, shall I jump in, guys? Unexpected career paths. So I know someone who used to be a PA for like a real big boss at IMG, actually, who ended up being a journalist, but went through that way of working in the company, doing education in evening classes and things like that, and doing things on the side, and doing it that way around. I know people that have been producers and have been researchers that have ended up in front of the TV screen. And again, that comes down to the ideas part, because someone's been ill or someone hasn't turned up for something, and then if they think that you've shown any interest or any amount of creativity or anything, sometimes you get a chance. And if it's something you want to do, then I think that's a really good way. Video journalism was something that I did for quite a while. So if you can shoot and you're actually comfortable in front of camera, I know someone who started out doing that from the camera side, but ended up doing more in front of camera. So those are all unexpected turns, I suppose. I also, the other thing that I would say is, don't always think about media leading to media jobs, because what people love, especially on screen, is they love an expert. So if you're really good at history, then you could become a historian on TV or a scientist on TV. Like, you think about all the people This Morning they have relationship experts, and you think of all of cooking and different things. If you've got an area of a real interest or a skill that you could then turn into TV, I think that is also a really good unexpected path, potentially. Hopefully that's answered the question, because it stumped me a little bit at the beginning, but yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great.
Could I just add as well? Sorry, Sophia,
Go for it.
quickly. I think it probably sounds a bit cliche, but if you're in the building, you have a chance of doing every single job in that building. I think that there's, to name a very real example, as a young guy at Formula One who 2 years ago maybe was cleaning, was going around and doing the bins and whatnot. And now he's in the gallery. He's working in the gallery, I think either behind EVS or on team radio or something. Absolutely. If you get into that building, no matter what you do, there's no bad job. Just get in there, talk to people, make friends, say, can I just shadow you for 10 minutes? And
Make
absolutely,
good tea.
Yeah, make great tea and you get great jobs.
Thank you both. That's excellent advice. I guess the second question that we had emailed into us kind of applies a bit broader to all of you, but do you have any tips of someone who's just starting to build connections?
Yeah, I'll kind of make a start on that one. It's a note I made earlier on. Look down every possible avenue of getting an answer to a question you want to ask. So one of my bigger interviews was during lockdown, and I interviewed the First Minister here at the time, Mark Drakeford, about the rules surrounding sports teams, and if you're talking local sports, community sports, who can go and play where, because we had local lockdowns here, which meant you couldn't leave your county, and there were grey areas and sorts for that. So I basically went onto my Twitter account, as it was now X, and opened it up to followers and people who I'd actually spoken to on my own radio show over the years, and kind of said, look, I'm going to be interviewing the First Minister. If you'd like to have your question answered from the horse's mouth, I'll hold it to, I'll try my best to hold it to account, and let's get something from there. And one of the questions I got was from a manager of a local football team who lived in a different county from where his football team actually was. So he said, I've got players who can come to training, but I'm not allowed to go and help train them. And then actually putting that question to the First Minister, he said, well, local lockdown rules don't apply if you're going to provide a voluntary service, a charity service, or if you're going to paid work. And that coaching your football team actually came under a voluntary service. So he was then able to go and train his team. So actually you're making a practical difference to people's lives. And to get to the point of the question, it was actually that interview came about from my youth worker, completely unexpected at the time. I was just going to youth club. I was 17, going on 18. Wasn't far off university doing my A levels, and he just happened to say, "Oh, I know Mr. Drakeford's secretary. I'll get you the interview if you want. And I said, yeah, there's the contact. You sent the email, and the interview was set up by the end of the week. So the point is, look down every possible avenue, of even where you don't expect it, of somebody who may know somebody. If that comes your way, don't ever pass up on it. Ask, it's gonna. Other people will tell you exactly the same thing, but ask around. And if you're looking ultimately to make connections, look in the places where you think other people might not expect.
Yeah, I would say as well, if you're looking to make connections, so this is different to if you see something advertised and you think, oh, I'm going to reply to that, or if you see a post on LinkedIn or someone points you in a direction like your youth worker did, that's a different thing. But if you're actively going out to pursue some people, what I would say is be measured and be targeting people specifically. And what I mean by that is don't do a scattergun. See, I think people, especially when you're really young and you're just starting out, you're just after those first opportunities. And sometimes it's really easy to just send your CV to everybody. And it has no feeling that it was for me. It feels like it was sent to 1,000 people. Whereas I think if you actually think, what do I want to do as my first thing, my first step? What would be really good and realistic as well? Realistic. What's a realistic step to get me that first job or that first thing? And look at the companies that you'd like to work for and maybe target 5 people and see what comes back before you send out 50 is what I would say. And the reason I say that now, when I am in my position a bit further down the line, is it's a very small industry. And I think once you've reached out to people, they remember. They certainly do. Most people remember. And if everyone sees you as being a runner, then it's really hard to shake that when you want to be seen as something else. So if you've approached everyone in the industry when you were 23 saying, oh, can I be a runner? Then suddenly everyone knows your name and they always think that you're junior. Does that make any sense? So I think by being more targeted and selective means that hopefully you can then progress within a certain few companies. So the next time you send out to different people, you're going for a researcher or an AP job or a trainee broadcast journalist or something, rather than everyone always seeing you as just one thing. Because I think pigeonholing can happen. And Luke and Alex and Tom, I know that you've had very different experiences, but I do think that happens in probably a lot of different roles.
I agree. I've been that person. I haven't scattergun, thank God for that one. But I had to be quite targeted with who I was going for. I think it's difficult in sport because I think obviously I'm based in some TV. In some TV shows they have credits, whereas in sport it's like, there's no credits. So you have to put some detective goggles on and think, okay, who am I looking for? Who's the best person to reach out to? And again, if you don't know these companies, if you don't know what IMG is, all this kind of stuff, it's fair. I didn't realize what IMG was until a couple of years ago. I was like, oh, they do so much. But yeah, definitely I back what you say, Lynsey. Like, just speak to a few people, maybe, and I don't mean this in a weird way, don't stalk them, but have an interest in what they've done. Like, one of the best things I did was I reached out to someone. I was like, look, I really like what you've done with X, Y, and Z. Can we have a chat? All this kind of stuff. Don't go in there maybe necessarily saying I want a job. Even just saying, can we have a chat virtually, or they may invite you to somewhere and have a chat with you in person. Just doing that, and then that kind of opens some doors. But yeah, totally agree with what you say. Just reach out to people.
Just reacting to what you just said there, which also sparks another idea. The best email I ever got from anyone, and they've gone on, so they were one of my first volunteers for a podcast that I started called The Offside Rule, and I did that with Hayley McQueen and Kate Borsay for a decade. It's still going, but they're no longer involved in it. But I had a volunteer group that we tried to give students a lot of experience doing the offside rule, and we've brought through many women in football media. And one of the first volunteers I took on, she wrote to me. Her name's Harriet Drudge, and I'll say her name on here, but she's now very high up at The Athletic. She's like their head of social media completely internationally. And she wrote to me on an email, and instead of saying what she wanted from me, she was basically saying what she could do for me to help my life be easier. And I was like, oh my God, give this girl whatever she wants. Because I think if anyone can make your life easier, rather than feeling like when you're emailing someone, it's taking their time and their energy, and like, I do get a lot, and I'd be lying if on a certain day that I don't roll my eyes. I always think, oh my God, I was once this person and I want to help everyone. But the reality is I can't, because I haven't got enough time. So I've got to then select. I've got to be like, well, who's impressed me? And it's a little bit like what Alex said, you know, that bit of background research. If someone said, oh, I like this that you did because of this, or I really like that because of the way you did that. Or if they do what Harriet did and say, oh, you know what, I saw that you did this. Or they might even say to me, Lynsey, your social media posts are rubbish. They probably are. I think I could do that for you better. Then I might be like, okay. You know, I just think about it, I think is what I would say before you send things. Don't just be desperate, and because you don't
Yeah,
have to be.
I mean, I've had it before. Even, you know, not that I've necessarily, in relative terms to you guys, have not been involved in the industry that long. It's kind of been, in a sense, a short but sharp rise so far. So when you're talking about that sort of thing, I've had lots of people come to me, people I've known from student media before that as well, even friends. And the thing that really annoys me is you talking about how you word those messages and how people come up to you. They go, right, so what I need you to do for me. And instantly I'm thinking, no, because you know, and what you would, I think, when you approach industry professionals, and if you are looking to climb the ladder, what you do need to do is kind of go, you know, as you said, I love your work, this is amazing, and if there's ever any sort of opening available, or if you ever need any sort of help, I'd love to be of assistance. I'd love the opportunity to be able to participate. Um, that boils down to, I think, personal preference, but I think I speak for a lot of people in the industry who actually would much rather hear the latter message of that than the former. So it is just being mindful of how you're talking to people.
Amazing. Well, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask us to wrap up here. So thank you very much to everyone for attending. I'm going to ask our panelists to finally share one highlight or one rewarding moment of their career, and also one piece of advice that they would give to someone who's probably sat here today thinking, I want to do this. What would you say to them? So Luke, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can. I've got in my head now something that is a funny story that it probably is the most rewarding thing. One of the most rewarding things. I messaged the guy who edits the F1 YouTube highlights on Twitter saying, "Hey, Dom, I love your work. I watch it every week. How's it going?" Sent a couple of messages. At the end of that week, I had organized an interview to start freelancing at F1. I think that it kind of kick-started my F1 journey for sure. But I think, yeah, to kind of wrap up what everyone else has said, you just need to be aware of how you're coming across to other people, not being needy, not being desperate, like Lynsey mentioned, and just, yeah, finding the time to kind of probably find that person that would go, oh, I've just had a lovely message on Twitter. If you message the boss of the Premier League on Twitter, they might be reading it, but you know, you need to find the people at your level that you can really just start a chat with, and then see where it goes from there. But yeah, I think just, yeah, self-awareness in terms of how much am I putting out there? Am I doing too much? Am I frustrating people? Just being aware of how you're coming across. And I think, yeah, that's an important skill to have.
Great. Thank you. And Alex, what about you?
I'm trying to think about memorable moments, and I'm really struggling. An obvious one is like obviously when Women's World Cup, Jesus, Women's Euros when it came home. A niche one is when this is very niche, but I was in Old Trafford and I went to the bathroom and standing next to me was an ex-England footballer, and that was weird. That was memorable. That was definitely like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And one bit of advice is it's generally something I'd say for all of media, and it kind of touched on about asking people and all this kind of stuff. And if you're sitting there, as we're saying, don't go scattergun, don't do some of these. But if you're sitting there and you're thinking, just reaching out to one person, and you're thinking, do I do it or do I not? Just do it. Like, I think so much in the media is like you sit there, you think, oh, what am I going to look like? What am I going to do this? Just do it, because I finding out an answer and getting a no is so much better than just sitting there thinking, what if? And you know, that's definitely something I've tried to carry, and it's definitely like student media. Like I remember in my student TV days where I was like, are we allowed to do this? Can we do this? Oh, I'll just ask and we'll see if we can do it. So that's definitely just one bit of advice. Just ask and see what happens.
Great, thank you. And Thomas, what about you?
Yeah, I could pick from a few. There's the time I interviewed Neil Warnock on a Massey Ferguson tractor. That was really interesting. That was one of
I
my
bet he loved
first.
that.
Oh, well, it turns out that we talked about classic cars for about 20 minutes, and he loves the Massey Ferguson tractor. And it was 3 weeks after Cardiff City had been promoted to the Premier League, in the 17-18 season as it was then. So that was spectacular. But no, most rewarding for me probably was actually another one that was completely out of the blue. At the time, I was still in a voluntary capacity, so I was waiting on tables. Uh, it was about 12:30 in the hotel where I was working, and I'd gone into the toilet. Richie McCaw crops up alongside me, and he'd been doing a speaking at an event in the hall next door, and he
There's
said,
a lot of toilets in this section, isn't there? A lot of
"There is,
toilet
there
talk.
is a bit, yeah."
Always be in a toilet. That's the advice here.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's the nature of the beast, really. But always talk to the bloke next to you at the stalls. But no, it's he came in and he just recognised me. He said, "You were in a press conference with me the other week, weren't you?" I was like, "Yeah, how do you remember that?" He said, "Oh well." He said, "Well, when it comes to the World Cup and I see a Welshman in a press conference, I never forget them because I'll always have the worst accent there." But so I suppose it's good. You get to be recognised by people you never ever thought you'd feel you were worthy of being in the company of, if that makes sense. And it goes back to what I think everyone else has been saying right at the start, is you kind of have that pinch me moment, and you've come full circle and you're going, wow, I've just spoken to one of my heroes, a global icon of their sport. Um, so I suppose it's a double-edged sword in the sense of, wow, look where you are, but at the same time, I'm stood working in the hotel around the corner from where I grew up, and you can't really forget where you came from. So it was a nice moment.
Great. And Lynsey, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, so in terms of the advice, I would say be resilient. If I could grant everyone anything, it would be in this industry to be resilient, because you are going to get knockbacks, you are going to get times when you have lows, and I think surround yourself by really good people. This industry is full of really good people, but I think also having people outside this industry is really good as well for your mental well-being, because it can be all immersive, I think, sometimes the job. So yeah, be resilient. And in terms of memorable moments, I'm sorry to do this, Alex, I'm going to have to go with the Women's Euros because I was England reporter. So I've got to say that was like unbelievable. I had been involved in women's football for a long time, since about 2011 I started. And so I'll give you a tiny bit of a clip of this story because it shows you the connection thing as well. So I was volunteering at Sports Personality of the Year, the editor back then of a program called Final Score, which is hopefully you all know what that is. It's on the BBC and they do all the reporters go around the grounds. He was at that awards. Someone that knew that I did football reporting introduced me to him, and he said, I'll audition you. And then I ended up working at Final Score. But he also was a huge advocate of women's football, and he knew I love my women's football, and he took me to a party with Jackie Oakley, Hope Powell, Kelly Smith, and all these England players, introduced me to everybody. And about 3-4 weeks later, the FA offered me the chance to present a show called the FA WSL show. And it was like a match of the day on the road for ESPN, for the BBC eventually. And it was on BT Sport for a while as well. And I presented that for about 6 or 7 years. Jackie Oakley started on it. She moved to the BBC permanently, and I took over. And I used to present in front of 30 people in the background. We used to have to gather people behind to do a link to camera because there weren't enough people watching at some of the matches. And as someone who also played football and would have loved those opportunities growing up, but just didn't think about it, I just realized the injustices, the 50-year ban. Kelly Smith, who's a friend of mine now, is like, oh my gosh, if she was around now, she would be like Ronaldo. She was so talented. So you're around all these talented women that will never get and prior to Kelly as well, that moment in the sun. And then you fast forward to 2022 and I'm England reporter and I'm watching England lift the Euros trophy. And then Leah Williamson comes in to do an interview with me and has a photo with the trophy. And then I get Chloe Kelly, who's done her celebration, and I sit down with her and I have a photo with her. And I'm just like, oh my God, you know, what has just happened? And I think that was more than sport. And that's why I'm saying it to repeat Alex, really, because otherwise I'd have gone for something completely different to try not to do the same thing. But I think it was more than sport. It was a social moment. It was a society moment. And there aren't many, I mean, I think sport's brilliant and a reflection of society, but when you get those moments when sport and society blend, oh my gosh, it just felt powerful. And I felt very similar to that when I worked at London 2012 as well, which was very memorable for the same reasons. It just felt, that is the last time I was happy in this country. I'm so sorry, I'm bringing a downer now, but it was like London 2012, everyone was happy. You'd walk around, people were smiling, and ever since it's been doom and gloom. So those two would be my best memories of working at both of those.
Amazing. I wish we had more time because this has been so useful and so insightful. So thank you to the four of you for giving up your time this evening. And thank you so much to everyone attending as well. This has been fantastic. And we look forward to seeing you in November for our next event. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you for sharing, Sophia.
All the
Great
best.
job.
Bye.
Lovely to meet you all.
And you. Good luck, everyone.